Back-to-back losses to the Detroit Red Wings and New York Rangers on afternoon games after a holiday, that's one thing. But losing to the Columbus Blue Jackets when they were on the second of a back-to-back and in lopsided fashion to boot, it's a bit concerning. And we're going to break it down and discuss whether or not it's time to be a bit worried about these Boston Bruins here on today's episode of Locked On Boston Bruins.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Tuesday, November 28th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. YouTube viewers will notice that I'm wearing a Pooh Bear toque today. I put these on after losses because I find Pooh Bear to be quite comforting, and we need some comfort after last night's loss to the Columbus Blue Jackets. Not great. A bit of a stinker. Well, a huge stinker for the Boston Bruins, and we'll discuss what to make of it here in a moment. A quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, X, Instagram, Threads, and you can find me, my dad jokes, hockey thoughts at Ian C. McLaren. The Boston Bruins fell to the Columbus Blue Jackets by a score of 5-2 on Monday. I talked yesterday about how we should put the losing streak in perspective. They had lost 2 games coming into this one. They had played back-to-back afternoon games, including travel, against a couple pretty good teams in the Detroit Red Wings and the New York Rangers. But with the caveat that we had to wait and to see how they played against Columbus to assess whether or not it was time to get concerned. And let's just say it, Columbus, last place in the Metropolitan Division, even after last night's win. This is a team that you cannot lose to. And what was the problem for the Bruins? Well, they allowed 40 shots on goal and gave the Blue Jackets 5 power play opportunities, and Columbus made good on one of those en route to the 5-2 win over the Bruins. And that goal, the power play goal, was the game winner scored by Kirill Marchenko in the third period. At that point, well, I guess that's not the game winner. The game winner was scored by Yegor Chinakhov late in the second period. They went up 4-0 early in the third. Matt Poitras, John Beecher scoring to make it a bit more respectable, but it was already out of hand at that point. The Bruins showing not much fight, not much pushback in this one. A very disappointing result, to be sure. Again, penalty trouble. They got some issues with Hampus Lindholm taking 2 minor penalties. Derek Forbort took a penalty. Denton Heinen, Jacob Lauko, and even more troubling in this one was the fact that we have this goalie rotation going on, and Jeremy Swayman was yanked from this one. He allowed, 2 goals on 19 shots. How many goals did he allow? No. Jeremy Swayman, just not having a very good game at all. And it's a bit of a catch-22. Is it a result of poor defending and all these power plays allowed? Is it a result of him not being as sharp as he was previously. He did allow 2 goals on 19 shots, an 895 save percentage. And he's been sub 900 over his last handful of appearances. And the one win he's had was a 909 save percentage. Overall, still very respectable 924 save percentage, but that has dropped pretty dramatically over the last handful of games. Linus Allmark wasn't much better. He came in and allowed 2 goals on 20 shots, a 900 save percentage, and the last few games for the Bruins have not been great overall, and we'll talk about that a little later on here in the podcast. Just a pretty poor effort for the Bruins. We expected a bit more pushback from this team after losing all those games over the weekend. Didn't see that. They weren't really playing hard. Credit, to the Blue Jackets. They came out. They do have some weapons. They have some players who can put the puck in the net. They've got a lot of good young players. Johnny Gaudreau, Patrick Kane in the mix as well. Ivan Provorov said they had a complete game as a team. They played fast. They played physical. They made plays. Their decision-making was great. And when they had room and time, they were able to make plays. Jim Montgomery wasn't pinning this one on the goalies, both of whom gave up 2 goals. He said they have to pin it on the lack of cohesion in front of the goalies. Interestingly, from Columbus's perspective, it was the first time in NHL history that 4 Russian players scored for the same team in the same game, with Dmitry Voronkov, Ivan Provorov, Kirill Malchenko, and Igor Chinakov getting the goals. So kind of cool for them. Special for the Russian guys. But from a Bruins perspective, they looked not great. And there's a lack of cohesion. As Jim Montgomery said, Brad Marchand saying they got a bit loose defensively, too loose with the puck. It's probably their biggest problem this year is giving up too many odd man rushes. That was a big problem last night. They need to be much tighter all over the ice defensively. He added in this league, there's so much parity. You see it tonight and every night. A last place team can win any night. And you have to be dialed in on the details. The Bruins have been very loose defensively. The penalty kill hasn't been as strong in recent games. And we're going to discuss whether or not it's time to be a bit worried about the Boston Bruins after this loss to Columbus here as the podcast continues. Every night around the NHL brings all kinds of possibilities. David Pastrnak could record a hat trick. Jeremy Swayman could post a 50-save shutout. And you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of Locked On. Sleeper is our number 1 choice for daily fantasy sports. And with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats to win a 100 times outcome on your bet. So, win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. Start paying attention and nail your picks and start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit with Sleeper. Terms and conditions do apply, but use code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability, but start winning big today with Sleeper. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Boston Bruins part of your daily routine, free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. And speaking of YouTube, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, so what do we make of Boston's recent swoon. Over the last 5 games, they are 1-3-1. They've allowed 4.6 goals per game. They have killed only 77.3% of opposition's power plays, and their team save percentage is .876. Now, in fairness, they have played some decent teams over that span, minus Columbus. That is a team that you should beat each and every night. But they lost 5-2 to the Red Wings, lost 7-4 to the Rangers. They lost 5-4 in overtime last Monday against the Tampa Bay Lightning. The lone bright spot over the last little bit was that 3-1 win over the Florida Panthers, in which they did look pretty good indeed. But overall, the last 5 games have not been pretty for this team, and to be honest, it's kind of to be expected. These aren't the same Bruins as last season. This isn't going to be a record-setting team. And it's unreasonable to expect them to carry an over 800 point percentage. They're going to fall back a bit. And let's be real, nobody expected this team to win the Atlantic Division once again. Nobody expected this team to challenge for the President's Trophy. And maybe second or third in the Atlantic was on the table. More likely a wild card team. Patrice Bergeron's gone. David Krejci's gone. They're relying on a couple young centers to carry the load in the bottom 6. They're relying on Pavel Zacha and Charlie Coyle to be top 6 options. They've played very well. Nothing taken away from them. But the Bruins as a whole are kind of regressing to what we expect them to be. Look, they're still first in the Atlantic. They're still a top team when it comes to the penalty kill, top 5 team anyways. They're one of the better defensive teams in the NHL. They're 6th in terms of goals allowed per game. But whereas a couple weeks ago they were first in these categories, they're starting to come back a bit. And even in terms of save percentage, I talked a couple weeks ago about whether or not this was all based on puck luck. And I talked about PDO and how the Bruins were leading the NHL in save percentage at 5-on-5 and in all situations. And that was boosting their success. And still, at the moment, they are 4th in the NHL in PDO in all situations, with a second-ranked save percentage of 91.83 and a shooting percentage of 10.59. So there's even a bit more of a tumble to happen, perhaps. You know, the belief is with PDO that it'll level off around 100. That's kind of the average. If the Bruins are going to be an above average team, it's because of the goaltending, and it's still pretty high up there. A 5-on-5, they are 3rd at 93.5. So if the goaltending's not there, this team has obviously a less of a chance to win. And that's true for many teams. Why was Jay Woodcroft fired by the Oilers? They weren't getting the goaltending. Why was Dean Evison fired by the Wild? They weren't getting the goaltending that they needed. What's more troubling is the play in front of those goalies. If the Bruins are going to have success, they have to have that strong team defense. The penalty kill needs to be on point. For me, one of the big problems is the amount of penalties that they have been taking over the last several games. They can't take so many penalties, and they're also giving up just a ton of shots lately, which is uncharacteristic of these Bruins, who are generally pretty strong defensively. Over the last 5 games, they've allowed 36.6 shots per game, which is second only to Columbus, who is allowed 37.5. They didn't allow that many last night against the Bruins. And conversely, the Bruins have generated only 28.6 shots per game. So that's almost a 10 shot difference. And that's an increased workload on the goalies. That's making things more difficult on them. And part of it is the amount of penalties that they have been taking. And, you just can't do that. You can't leave your goalies out to dry like that. And let's see, over the last 5 games, the Bruins rank 8th in the amount of penalties taken. That the first place teams I should add are Florida and Ottawa, who really racked it up last night. But if you are shorthanded for almost 10, 12 minutes a game, that's a good chunk of the game. And that's putting extra pressure on the penalty kill unit, which has struggled. It's hard to maintain a 85-90% success rate when you are killing 4, 5, 6 penalties a night. And that's adding extra strain on the goalies, who are seeing more pucks. And add to that the odd man rushes that they're giving up as well. They really need to tighten things up. And I talked yesterday about how the Bruins had only one practice over the last 10 days or so because of travel and the like. They were given the day off today. You can make of that what you will. Perhaps Jim Montgomery should have said, we're traveling back tonight. Better get your butts to the rink in the morning. Didn't do that. He gave the team the day off, but you can be sure they'll be back at it on Wednesday with some pretty intense practicing going on as they try to right their ship. The next game for the Bruins is Thursday against the San Jose Sharks. That is an opportunity to get back on track. And if they drop that game, then, we're really going to have more to discuss, because the Sharks are on track to be one of the historically bad teams in the NHL. And we'll preview that one later on in the week, of course. But is it time to get worried about the Bruins? It depends on how you look at it. If you think that they're going to maintain first place status all season long, then sure, you can be worried. If you think that they're kind of a middle of the pack team, maybe challenging for a non-wild card spot, a top 3 spot in the Atlantic, they're kind of where they should be at the moment. If your expectations of this team were wild card at best, then they're kind of becoming what we expected them to be. They weren't going to maintain that first place status all season long. I never thought that. You look at this team, it is a transition year, and they're setting themselves up to be that, especially after losing out on a key free agent that they could have added for free, Patrick Kane, and he has decided where he's going to play. We'll talk about what it means for the Bruins and the Atlantic Division here as the podcast continues. If you are running a business of one, you're wearing many hats in your day-to-day life. With Collective, bookkeeping and accounting don't need to be one of them. You can start saving thousands of dollars and hours of your time by letting Collective handle your business's paperwork. Collective is the #1 financial solution for freelancers, contractors, and self-employed entrepreneurs, and it lets you focus on your passion, not your paperwork. Collective knows that if your business of one makes over 80 grand a year, you'll find the most value from their services. Join the thousands of solopreneurs who have saved an average of 10 grand per year on taxes with their structure. Right now, Collective is offering 1 month free and no onboarding fees when you go to collective.com/lockedonnhl and tell them Locked On sent you. That's a $550 value for free when you go to collective.com/lockedonnhl and tell them Locked On NHL sent you. That's collective.com/lockedonnhl tell them Locked On NHL sent you over. Bessie's jumping on the podcast here to help us discuss Patrick Kane signing with the Detroit Red Wings. Now, I was going to talk about how on yesterday's 32 Thoughts podcast, Elliot Friedman suggested that the Bruins had been kicking the tires on this one. And hockey-wise, I guess it made sense because the Bruins, of course, have a lack of draft picks and prospects to deal with. And if they wanted to add this season, it would make sense to go the route of free agency, like they did with James Van Riemsdyk, Kevin Shattenkirk, and Milan Lucic. So they wouldn't have to give up anything and could add to the roster. But as it turns out, Patrick Kane is signing with the Detroit Red Wings. Gives him a chance to reunite with Alex DeBrincat, with whom he enjoyed playing back in Chicago, and gives the Red Wings a real boost here because they are in the mix for a playoff spot at the moment and made a big statement over the weekend by beating the Bruins. Right now, they are third in the Atlantic in points and point percentage, ahead of Toronto, ahead of Tampa Bay, and looking to hold off the Sabres and Senators, who are also looking to make some noise in the Eastern Conference playoff picture. Now, Kane is 35. He's coming off hip resurfacing procedure. Not really clear, when he can get back on the ice and actually play for the Red Wings, much less return to form as a top line offensive player. He did have 21 goals and 36 assists last season with the Blackhawks and the Rangers. It was his fewest points since the lockout season and didn't make much of an impact for the Rangers in the playoffs. We all know his track record. We know his history, both on and off the ice. And altogether, I'm just as glad that he's not a member of the Boston Bruins. For one, they didn't really have the cap space to make that work. And I'm just not a fan of him as a personality, his off-ice stuff. They have enough of that to deal with at the moment with Milan Lucic still on the books. And yeah, I don't know hockey-wise if he's even able to contribute all that much at this point anyways. They're looking to get more out of Jake DeBrusk. That will be a significant addition if he can get going. And I mean, altogether, they had right now, in terms of projected cap space, the Bruins have $54,000 available. So they would have had to subtract in order to add. And who knows if it's even an addition to begin with. Because who's going to bump out of the lineup? Who's leaving to make room for him? Anyways, it's a moot point as he is going to the Detroit Red Wings, and they have a bit of a boost here potentially as they try to make the playoffs. Now, are there other free agents in the mix who could help similarly? I point you to former Boston Bruin Phil Kessel. Similar situation. He is 36. Last season, he had 14 goals for Vegas, 20 goals in 56 games just a couple seasons ago. Why not give him a look if you're looking to add some offense to the table, some help on the power play? I would love to have Phil Kessel back in black and gold. And that's something we can discuss on a different episode of Locked On Boston Bruins. Stinker in Columbus last night. If they lose on Thursday to San Jose, it'll be really time to get worried. But I think at the moment, the consensus, for me at least, is that there was going to be some regression from the very hot start. This team isn't the President's Trophy caliber that they were last year. And if the goalies aren't on point and the team's hanging them out to dry with taking a bunch of penalties and giving up odd man rushes, it's not a recipe for success. And this team needs to, work hard in practice tomorrow to get back on track. Speaking of tomorrow, we'll be back with a fresh episode. We'll do some power rankings and bring you all the latest on the black and gold here on Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day. Take care of yourselves, friends. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you again here tomorrow.